You're listening to The Starting Zone, a podcast about World of Warcraft and the people who play it. And now, here are your hosts.
Well, hello and welcome to The Starting Zone, the podcast about World of Warcraft and the people who play it. Today is July 22nd, 2024, and my name is Spencer Downey. Thank you so much for listening and subscribing to the podcast. I'm joined today, as always, by my co-host, Jason Lucas. Jason, how are you doing this fine Monday?
Oh, Spencer, hello. I'm doing quite well because today is the last day of
Dragonflight
10.x in North America. Yeah,
basically Dragonflight.
Essentially. Like, no new content, obviously, in that regard. But yeah, I mean, we are recording basically on the precipice of pre-patch coming out tomorrow in NA. So that's very exciting. You know, we talked a lot in this summer about pre-patch and how, I don't know if I want to say revolutionary it is, but this is a really big change to the game coming in tomorrow. And I'm not going to lie, it's been a little bit weird just kind of holding our breath being on the other side of it this week, you know, and I'm sure maintenance is going to be a mess tomorrow. I don't know if we'll actually be able to play the game at any reasonable hour or anything. And Thank you in advance, Live Ops team for WoW, for all that you do to keep us entertained. Tomorrow is going to be a bear, I am afraid, but man, being out the other side of it is going to be super exciting because there's just so much cool stuff to do.
It definitely
a lot of times
is.
the pre-patch comes in, it's like, okay, we got a couple new talents and okay, we're waiting for this thing to happen. But man, there's a whole new way to play the game starting tomorrow.
Well, not just play the game, but interact with like how to access your characters, interact with the minimap, interact with like all these things are going to be dynamically changed tomorrow as we move into the epilogue, if you will, of Dragonflight, because we'll also have, I believe, a lot of that questing starting to kick off. Not the new event. The new event's not for a week. We'll talk about that farther in the show. But there should still be, I believe, quest chains that are starting to kick off and little conversations you can have with different characters around Valdrakken and the major cities about what's happening or what did happen and sort of wrapping up the storylines or any sort of tail ends that they want to sort of let people explore when it comes to Dragonflight. So we'll see that all starting to happen too, which is kind of exciting. So moving into that epilogue of an expansion, I do remember very well the Shadowlands epilogue and all of the different characters you got to talk to and different stories you got to learn about and what is next for them. I also remember the BFA one. There was like whole storylines there that they chose to explore at the end of the expansion during that epilogue period. So there's going to be a lot in there for folks to sort of check out, even though the big event doesn't kick off for a week. So yeah, we'll talk about that a bit later in the show. But yes, it is another week in Warcraft, and it's an exciting week because patch day is tomorrow. We got our warbands coming out where people are going to be having to spend at least 20 minutes, if not longer, trying to log into World of Warcraft for the first time because you'll have that merger of your account taking place. So expect to have that, to experience that. Don't expect everyone to be around and online and available for things. Expect your add-ons to break. If you haven't backed up your WTF folder, today's a great day to back up your WTF folder just to make sure that, you know, if you lose all your macros or you lose whatever it is, you still have some backup level of it. If you're someone who has weak auras that you love and live off of, copy the strings down just to make sure you got those strings inside a text file, something like that, so that you have those sorts of things backed up and available to be brought back in case it all gets wiped somehow in whatever rearrangement of patching that they do for your files and what's happening in your file structure. So yeah, just, you know, be sure you got all your ducks in a row. It's a good day to do it. You'll have tomorrow during maintenance to do the offline stuff. If you want to back up your WTF folder, things like that. Technically, you could start doing that tomorrow morning before you left for work, something like that. You'd probably still be fine. But if you want to get weak auras and everything, tonight's the night. Be sure you get in there and grab that stuff before servers go down tomorrow for maintenance and everything like that. But Jason, what did you get up to this past week in World of Warcraft before we dive into what's going on tomorrow?
I got into quite a bit, although a bit less than maybe the last few weeks. And that was sort of by design, right? Like, I know we're going to be ramping up here quite a bit over the next few months, really. So I went pretty hard with Season 4, you know, especially at the outset. I was doing a ton of dungeons and just everything, just trying to max out. Had a couple characters rolling. So I'm trying to just dial it back a little bit, have a couple weeks that are a bit more chill before we start to ramp back up. We did one night of raiding, did Heroic Vault and first 2 on Mythic, which was nice. I mean, the Awakened raids feel pretty good once you're optimized as much as we are, but we've had pretty good attendance. I've had enough attendance to still be doing mythic fights this far into the process. It's really cool. We haven't really been in that position before. Usually by now it'd be like, okay, we're going to just, blast heroic all the way through in, 90 minutes and call it a night and see you next week. We're still sort of doing that to an extent, but it's nice to have that, to have that attendance, have those options. Only ended up doing 1 key last week, which is what I told myself I was going to do. Yep. And so that was nice. Just did a +10, which was awful because it was an awful combo last week, but I did it with people I like to play with. So we had a good time and all, but I just wanted to have something in the vault, try out the combo, just, see what I felt about it, which I felt exactly what I expected to feel about it when we talked last week.
Yep.
So, just really making a concerted effort. Like, I'm not going to spend time on these activities that I typically do mid-season that just are not going to matter anymore. And we finished that one, and everybody's like, should we do another one? And I was like, well, I'm up for it. But if I do another one, then I'm going to make myself do 2 more so I could get 4 for the vault. And we all sort of agreed, like, listen, we're good with the 1, and we'll pick it up for raid and we'll go from there. We'll see. I think maybe this week might be the same thing, but next week is a dungeon event, so I'm gonna have to get 4 in just to get the quest done, get the bullion reward and all that.
Yeah. There's some weird bullion stuff that happened this past week, so we'll talk about that on today's show too.
Yeah, I was a little unhappy about that. I'm gonna be honest. I went into entitled gamer mode, but we'll talk about it. We'll get there. It's fine. It's fine now. I didn't play any remix at all because I finished, and so I did not. Check in and just, I'm just gonna get bronze. I don't know. One of the people I play with is a real completionist type player, and his thing is trying to just get stat capped and sit at the bronze cap and everything. It's like, I'm not doing that. I'm done. So I'm done with that, which feels nice. It feels nice. Just move on from that. I enjoyed it, but I'm done.
There's something to be said about getting to bronze cap if there's some sort of conversion that takes place. Even if it's like a copper per bronze or whatever it was that they did, it's still a good amount of coin you're going to end up with at the end of that event if whatever they choose to do with that conversion that rolls over. It could be nothing. Yeah, it could be you just lose all of it, but I wouldn't feel like they probably don't do that. I feel like they probably give you something.
Maybe. I mean, there might be some kind of gold conversion or something. I mean, normally the gold conversions they do are terrible. The rate is horrendous. Yeah. And, the cap would only be, what is the bronze cap is like 200K or something. So it wouldn't be a lot, but this guy's like a gold capper and all that on his main and everything. So, but I'm done with the mode, which feels wonderful. So a couple other projects to work on this week in Dragonflight. I got the Warlock from 60 to 70, which really didn't take very long at all, even in the current state of things. I was playing Demonology, which actually I quite enjoyed. I sort of had this impression that I don't like Warlock, which is probably true. I never really connected with the class, but I had fun leveling up Demo this time. That's class number 13, so I got one of each at level 70 at this point. And, just taking advantage of stuff like the Dream Surges, right? And you get the 20% bonus XP in everything you do in the zone, and you just focus on that zone, do the world quest and all that. I did most of it outdoors, and it really didn't take very long at all. So that's cool to be done with that. And now with pre-patch and with the XP reduction and the event coming in, I'm going to work on some horde tunes and some allied races and stuff. Just, play some characters I haven't played in a while. And another thing in that category is, all right, I'm not like the most fun and creative, raid leader, guild leader, team leader on earth. Okay. We pretty much, here's the schedule. We're going to show up and we're going to play the game. But the one thing that I do every expansion that is pretty fun and that people like is the last raid of the expansion, we do single class. Everybody show up on a paladin or a druid or a monk, and then we're going to raid. And if you show up on not that class, then you can't come. So, here's a advance notice, get a tune ready, etc. This time, the team sort of, I don't want to say insisted, but the loudest voices were saying, let's do demon hunters and evokers. It's not one class, but one class can't round out a raid anyway of these, and it's Dragonflight, so we'll get the evokers in, and then we can have demon hunter tanks and whatever. So I said, okay, we'll mix it up. Well, I think we're taking druid's turn this time out, but whatever, we'll do all swoopy tunes, everybody with wings. And so my DH has been in mothballs since season 2. Logged into her the other day for the first time in quite a while. And she was 402 item level or something, which is pretty badly outdated. And I just started doing the weekly stuff. I did some LFR for Bullion, so I get some weapons and stuff. And in a few hours, I got her like up to 478 or something. I got like 75 item levels just in a relatively brief session. Just had to sit in some raid finder queues and everything, which isn't super fun. And you can only apparently get like 2 bullion at a time. And she was 12 bullion behind. But, just starting to chip away. I want to get at least like north of 480 for normal raid for that night. So I'm not like a complete burden on anyone. But yeah, that was really fun. I'm looking forward to that event. It's one of the only like wacky, silly, fun things that we did. It's like a tradition we've upheld for years and years now. So that's pretty cool. And just letting everybody know, hey, this is the plan. This is how much time you have. And when the pre-expansion event starts, you should be able to get some catch-up gear, whatever, level up quick. Like if you don't have a tune, if you want to participate, like this is what you need to do. So I'll be hopping in on the DH here and there a little bit just to squeeze out a few more item levels, get some bullion, get some more really nice, optimized gear from the vendor. And the weird thing is it's always been like a Sunday night thing, but now because of early access, it'll be Wednesday. It'll be like a midweek thing.
Yeah.
Because normally it's like the Sunday raid vibe is very chill, right? It's the end of the weekend, everybody's winding down. We're just kind of messing around and whatever. So, but now it'll be, okay, today we're doing the last raid of the expansion and we're doing our wacky single, or in this case, 2-class raid. And then the next day we'll be playing War Within. So I'm pretty excited. We're getting really close now.
Really are getting close. It is like the ramp up is serious. For someone who has not played a ton this expansion, I am definitely going to be diving deep into the event when it kicks off next week to be able to make sure I have the characters that I want geared enough that I have some options for during the leveling period that we're going to have, because I do feel like I'll be able to get more than one character up and determine what that feels like at max level for what I want to be doing. I need to find a team or what I want to do, or talk to you about whether or not I'm coming back to that, or see what, Josh is doing with his team, or see what other people are doing with their teams and what I want to do. I have to set goals for that expansion as far as what time commitments I can make. There's a lot of things I need to do that are just sort of like coming up quick in the next 2 months. So I got a lot on the plate when it comes to that sort of thing, but we'll see what happens with it. I dove into a little bit of the Pandaria event that's been going on for a while now, just to see what that felt like now, because I haven't played it in like, I guess, a month and a half, 2 months.
Yeah, I don't think you didn't play it after the big buff to bronze and threads came in.
I did.
So, that was a huge shift in the way that all feels.
So I played a chunk of that this past week, and I mean, it's still enjoyable. I think I just have a couple of goals that I'm trying to accomplish as far as leveling characters go. So I'm just probably going to work on that over the next 27 days that we have left before that event ends. So we'll see how that goes. But I got WoW goals, man. There's WoW things I need to do. So I need to start ramping up the amount of time I spend in the game again and get that going. So see how that goes. It's time to do it. Yeah.
I ended up in a weird spot where I really blasted through all the goals that I had pre-War Within, like super early. And I've that the meme of like the waiting meme, and it's the guy standing on like standing around staring at the window, or like, that's what I felt like the last couple of weeks, because I'm like, well, I really have it doesn't even make any sense to put any more time into Dragonflight right now, because now it's the weekend before the pre-patch and all this stuff. So, I'm ready to stop holding my breath on some of this stuff. But the cool thing is, I do feel like I got pretty much my whole list checked off the last couple of weeks. All that weird stuff, the heritage armor and the 13 classes and all this stuff that I didn't want to have hanging over my head after 11.0, it's done. So I'm just totally ready to immerse myself in the new reality here.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see where we end up in 2 months from now, because I do feel like that reality can change pretty dramatically, especially once we sort of hit max level, get through the content, see what's going on, see where we feel. So we're in that shift, and we'll see what happens with that shift. Before I hop into what's going on this week in World of Warcraft, I want to highlight two things that are non-retail / War Within announcements that took place this week, because we're not going to chat. The show's primarily going to be, for this episode, retail and War Within, to get people caught up for the big launches of things coming up. But they did see Rise of the Zandalari patch come in for Cataclysm Classic. That's going to happen on July 30th, so that's next week. You're going to be able to start hopping in and doing all that Zandalari content, the new dungeons, things like that. So if you're someone who's excited about that, get pumped. That's coming up. And as well as world bosses are now live in Season of Discovery. So if you're someone who's doing Season of Discovery, get in there, try out the new world bosses. I'm sure there's groups forming up for it. I know there's raid teams trying to put together regular kills for world bosses for folks, as well as people working on their attunements. And I know that Blackwing Lair's attunement was broken, or so not Blackwing Lair, Anixia's attunement was broken for Alliance. Some more Horde favoritism happening there. So Alliance tunes were struggling to get attuned to be able to do Anixia. So now that's getting resolved as well. But yes, those Season of Discovery enjoyers, get out there and enjoy the new world boss content this week. With that, let's hop into what's going on this week in World of Warcraft. All right, this week in World of Warcraft is the Battleground bonus event where the Sign of Battle buff is up, increasing honor gains from Battleground objectives and wins by 50%. And there's a quest to win 4 random Battlegrounds, which gets you some Marks of Honor and Conquest. The last hurrah is Zarelek Caverns, or maybe we get to just choose which last hurrah we want, because we knew that when pre-patch dropped, we were going to see a shift in this, potentially all world bosses being awakened, as well as maybe getting to pick which last hurrah you do, or you get all 3. Maybe you can take all 3 this week, and it's just like a huge boost at the end of the season. We don't know what that's going to look like. That'll happen tomorrow after maintenance, or Wednesday, depending on when we see servers come up, and what ends up happening with that. But if you're someone who wants to get on down to Zarelek Caverns and do the last hurrah, it means you're also could be killing Sakali Elders, the awakened world boss for the week, down there, dropping some 499 eye level loot. The PvP brawl for the week is Packed House, where, yep, they've put more PvP in your PvP. This is arenas with 15 versus 15 players in them. It's just crazy, berserk. Everyone is just trying to kill each other, and there's not much healing or anything else that can happen in this. Just insanity that takes place inside of arenas. So, yeah, it's definitely a packed house, and it's actually one of the more fun brawls because they're very fast. So if you're someone who wants really fast content, this is a good time to dive in and experience that. Mythic Plus affixes for our final, I guess, our new week. I just know that what we have on the block right now is Fortified, Afflicted, and Raging. So we know that non-boss enemies deal more damage and have more health, while in combat, these afflicted souls will periodically appear, and they can be healed or dispelled to get rid of them. And non-boss enemies enrage at low health, granting them temporary crowd control immunity, which can be dispelled off of them with, raging, or as far as the raging effect goes with soothe, that sort of thing. Or you can just be sure that you kill these mobs quickly if they get down below 30%. But I don't know if Mythic Plus affixes are still going to be the current affixes or not. Jason, do you know if these are still going to be the current affixes or not?
I don't know for sure. I mean, anything could change. I can speak about precedent, and precedent would be that the rotation does not get interrupted as a result of this, and so therefore the rotation would rotate around to Fortified, Afflicted, and Raging. So we'll see if that's actually the case. And if so, this is not like a combo that I super love. Raging is obviously worse with Fortified than otherwise because stuff is doing more damage. So then if you can't stun it or whatever, it could end up nuking somebody. And Afflicted just stinks because there are specs that can't even do anything about it. And for the specs that can do stuff about it, they have to pay a lot of attention to it, and it pops up over and over again. Overall, I would say, assuming that this is the combo, it's not probably as distasteful to me as this past week was, where we had Tyrannical plus 2 different flavors of ghosts. That I really don't like. This is not great, and it's very comp dependent, right? If you have like a Resto Shaman with Poison Cleanse Totem, then you pretty much don't really have Afflicted because they can just drop that Poison Cleanse Totem, clear both of the Afflicteds, and you keep going. Can be a problem in Brackenhide Hollow or a place where you have other poisons you actually have to dispel from players, but there's a big difference, I think, between the tools that some classes have for this and the tools other classes are lacking. I'll probably just get in and try to do get one under my belt for the week with the new spec changes and everything, try it out, see how it feels, and I don't really have much of an appetite to be slamming Mythic Plus at this point.
Yeah.
I do hope that we get to choose our last hurrah and that all the world bosses are awakened. That would be amazing. We just don't know for sure right now as we're speaking about it. Like, We are pretty sure that the design intent is for all 3 raids to be awakened from now on after maintenance this week. So you can pick whatever raids you want to do on whatever difficulty and get the appropriate awakened rewards for it. It would make sense that would apply to stuff like the world bosses and outdoor events that have also been tied into this. But that's not, we don't have confirmation for sure. It's not live in the game right now, so we can't say that it's intentional or it's going to happen or whatever. I do wonder if all that stuff is awakened, if it's all rewarding 480 caches and stuff. That could be a really good way to grab some quick item level on a fresh tune or a tune that's really outdated. If you could do every outdoor event in Dragonflight and do a whole lap and get a 480 from all of it, that's pretty nice. And you can catalyze that stuff too, so you can get 4-piece going. Obviously, the stuff that comes in next week from the event is going to be a lot better, but you got to start somewhere, right? You don't want to be going into the event with no gear. So that would be really cool if it works out that way. That's the impression that I'm under, and as an entitled gamer, that's what I want is to have that breadth of stuff rewarding the higher item level. But sitting here at on the afternoon the day before, we just don't know for sure.
Yeah, it's tricky to know what exactly is going to be the state of the game when it goes live on Tuesday evening. But we do know that there's some more stuff we want to talk about from this past week, as well as changes that have now come into place that will affect the future weeks, including Bullion, which we mentioned top of the show, had some issues this past week, Jason. So we identified, apparently according to Linksy, they identified an issue that was caused by antique bronze bullion to become discontinued earlier than intended. Bullion will begin dropping again next reset, as in tomorrow. And basically, there's going to be a catch-up that you're going to be able to pick up to catch up alongside the normal bullion. You'd get the bullion that you didn't get last week. What we know of this is that Wowhead had done some sleuthing and data mined that there was a 12-week window in which players were allowed to get bullion. My best guess is that back when this patch was first coming out, someone went, how long should we set this to happen for? And someone went, I don't know, 12 weeks, and then we can just adjust it once we have a clearer idea of when the deadline's going to be. And then it just got lost and someone forgot and no one updated it. And it was supposed to change to 15 weeks or whatever it was, and it never did. And they just forgot to bump that number. That's my best guess as to what happened with it. But either way, they've rectified the situation. And Jason, you may have felt entitled last week, but at least they're giving you your just rewards.
Yes, it was just weird because there was no communication about this, right? The only communication we'd ever had was, oh no, you get a bullion every week until the end of Dragonflight, like the literal end of the expansion. And then, we got into raid last night and nobody who was caught up got a bullion. And it was like, okay. And then looking around, early in the week last week, oh, nobody else got it either. It wasn't just some weird quirk or really weird bad luck. It's just off, And then, there was that Wowhead post, like you mentioned, where there was like a string about max bullion received and everything. So, I think what you're saying is likely. I think it's also possible they thought they were just going to shut it off and that nobody would make a stink about it. But then once the stink happened, it was easy enough to just chalk it up to a bug or some kind of unintended behavior. Maybe a little bit of both. I don't know. But the cool thing is we're not losing the bullion. Like, you'll just get 2 this week when you kill an Awakened raid boss. And, I was just a little perturbed because I wasn't expecting to hit any kind of bullion cap, right? And there was stuff I didn't buy yet that I kind of wanted. Like, nothing really critical to how I approach the game or how I play or how I build. But, for example, I didn't get the thing that upgrades the item level on Fearloth, the Legendary Axe. I didn't buy that yet. Oh. I don't use it. I don't play main spec DPS. I don't ever play DPS spec, actually. But, I have the thing sitting there, which is a cool item to have. And it's just lower item level than it could be. I don't need any more bullion for anything important. So, that would be a cool thing to have, So for a few days there, I'm going, I'm thinking like, man, I wish I had known because maybe this other thing I wouldn't have bought because it would be cool to have these other things instead. I just chalked it up to like, oh man, we're going to be able to get, 4 more items or whatever between the weekly drops and the dungeon event and all that. So I'm glad that the communication was a bit late, but it came out and, it kind of just clearly explained the situation. So I'm good. I'm glad they're going to leave it on and that we're going to get one a week, for the next month, because that's what they told us it was going to be. And there's a lot of cool stuff you can buy from bullion. So the more of it you get, the better that feels. So I'm glad it worked out. It was just really weird on Tuesday night when nobody got one.
Yeah. I'm sure everyone was asking questions, and that's why they were like, we've discovered. I'm like, I don't know necessarily if you've identified or discovered that there was an issue. I'm pretty sure a bunch of people screamed at you that there was an issue, wondering what was going on with their Bullion for the week. All right. We also got the what to do before pre-patch update blog that came out. This actually came out on the 16th. So the unfortunate thing of recording on Mondays is when something comes out on Tuesday evening, which would have still happened if we recorded on Tuesday. We wouldn't have had this either. We don't get to talk about it until the following Monday. So yes, so what to do today before tomorrow is what this basically is post-wise, is once the War Within pre-expansion update arrives, achievements and customizations will fly off into the sun-kissed horizon. So you'll want to take some time to do the following before the update. The Awakened raids, all current Dragonflight raids will become Awakened, is where they state that here. So just be aware. And obtaining the renewed Proto-Drake embodiment of the Blazing and renewed Proto-Drake embodiment of the Storm Eater dragon riding customizations will be more of a challenge. So keep that in mind. If you're someone who's like, hey, I want my guaranteed mounts, this was your last week to get in there and kill that last boss on easy mode before it just becomes Awakened all the time. So keep that in mind. Mythic Plus, the leaderboards are going to lock at 10 p.m. Pacific time the night before maintenance. So that's tonight. That means that they lock down in 10 hours. So just be aware of that from when I'm recording right now and when I'm speaking at this moment. So yes, they're going to lock down tonight. And at July 22nd at 10 p.m. Pacific time, that's July 23rd at 22 CEST for the EU folks out there. Basically, the ratings that qualify for the 0.01% will get the Draconic Hero 57 title achievement, and that will be recorded. And so right now that is at 3,643 rating. If you are not basically if you're not in that 1% of 3,643 rating, you are not going to get that title. That is as of when we're recording. So that could shift slightly before tonight, but you never know. So we'll find out for folks who are going to be getting that title. As far as
it's probably actually higher than that right now, even as we're speaking, but this was the last official update we got. So this is really high. The highest I've ever gotten is like 3K 50, which isn't really high, but you know, that was high. A lot. That was a lot of work. It was a lot of dungeons and time spent and like, you know, kind of deliberately pushing rating where I could push it or whatever. Basically just to see the 3K number. No, I wasn't shooting for the title or anything, but man, 3,600 plus, and this is probably going to end up, I would think this will probably land somewhere around like above 3,700. That is a lot of rating. That's some tough sledding, I think, to get through those dungeons that high, and especially this point in the expansion overall. I mean, a lot of players are pretty checked out. So
yeah,
to be that dedicated to pushing this, like, and the only reason you're doing this is for this, right? Like, once you get above 2,500 ish, the game doesn't really reward you with anything else, right? You have Keystone Hero done, whatever. Like, you're not getting a tangible reward. You're not getting a title for anything like that. Mm-hmm. This is specifically pushing it to try to land in that top 0.1% just to get that title. So that is some dedication. That's a pretty big challenge. So, we're almost at the end of the season at this point.
Yeah. This also means PvP players out there that your stuff is going to be shutting off tonight at 10 p.m. Pacific as well. So yeah, with the end of the season, it's no longer possible to earn PvP seasonal rewards, titles, or Dragonflight Season 4 rankings, and the titles will be awarded in the weeks after the season's end, which means, hey, they'll do the usual caveat of do not race change your character, or faction change your character over the next few weeks until these rewards and whatnot have been distributed, because if you do, it can break things for you, and that's not good. The Draconic Gladiator 5 and Dragonflight PvP Season 4 in the top 0.1% achievement will and ladder for 3v3, that's ending. The Draconic Legend 5 is ending. Players can still queue for rated PvP modes to earn Honor and Conquest and progress towards the faction-themed Vicious Dream Talon mount for Horde and Alliance. Now, this is important to note. That if you are someone who's like, oh, I just really wanted the Vicious Dream Talon, you can still earn that. So that's still something you'll be able to earn just through participating inside rated PvP. But everything else is locking down when it comes to those high-end titles and whatnot. The following rated PvP rewards can only be earned during Dragonflight Season 4 and will no longer be able to be earned once it ends. That's the Draconic Gladiator's Drake, the Bronze Infinite Weapon Illusion, Dragonflight Season 4 PvP Elite Weapon and Transmog sets, as well as combatant, challenger, rival, duelist, gladiator, and legend titles. Those are all going away. So just keep that in mind when it comes to that sort of thing. So that's what we're going to have shut down tomorrow for folks who are curious about that. It's important to note. We do have a couple of blogs that we want to discuss on today's show too. One of them being a very hot topic around the community at the moment. So before we dive into that hot topic, I just want to do a brief overview of UI changes that we're going to see hit into effect tomorrow. The user interface and quest updates within War Within. It's another blog post that came out. All the blogs are going to be available inside our show notes. So if you're someone who's like, hey, I really want to track down that thing they talked about, you can always go to thestartingzone.com, click on the latest episode, and click on the links, and it'll take you to all these posts. And the coolest part about it is if you go back in time, you can find the patch notes from like 3 years ago or 4 years ago or when launches happened, because that archive of our show tracks and keeps all of that stuff nice and safe. And as long as Blizzard doesn't delete their posts, which they deleted some of the stuff from like 10 years ago, there's actually pretty cool to go back and read some of the changes and when they came in and what happened with them. All right, so there's a new map legend coming in. When you open up your map, there's going to be a legend that you can access that will explain what all of the icons mean. So campaign quests, legendary quests, repeatable quests, in-progress quests, important quests, meta quests, which, if you're curious what those are, they're time-gated quests that give valuable endgame rewards. Local story, so stories that are to local cultures or side quests, as well as places where you turn in quests. And so they have a different icon for each of those different things. And so there's a legend that represents each of those things. They also have different icons for limited time activities, for just general activities like dungeons and pet battles and raids and delves and dig sites if you're an archaeology fan, as well as movement-based icons for teleport points, cave entrances, flight points. Those are all getting a little legend as well as icons associated with them on your map, so you can track all of those things, which does sound like the map's going to get very busy, although I'm willing to bet there's filters to turn all of this off. So just keep that in mind. They also mention again that arachnophobia mode is in as something you can toggle on and off inside your UI. It's something we've talked about a bunch on the show. Cool little feature that they added. The spellbook updates with the new search function to actually find specific spells or spells you have not added to your bar inside of your spellbook. You can do that, as well as the spellbook can also be minimized and passive abilities can be hidden from the list. Those are all great features for that. Now, the biggest additional feature that I'm excited about from this particular blog post is that crafting reagents will now indicate what expansion they're associated with. This is one of the UI updates they put in. I am thrilled about this. I don't know about you, but the amount of times I've gone to the auction house at the beginning of an expansion and tried to find the new kind of gem to put into my gear and not remembered what the new gem was and having to go to Wowhead and look at professions and try and find the gems and which gems or whatever guide, because I do not remember what ones are from this. Because when you search for haste, like 5 different types of gems from different expansions show up and you have no idea which one is the current one. And it's not always the one with the highest stats, because there are ones that have higher stats from previous expansions that then can't go into current gear. So it's a funny thing. So I'm glad that they are throwing in that indicator to let you know what expansion things are associated with. I will no longer buy the wrong thing from the wrong expansion without knowing what's going on and find out later. So yeah, that's a nice change to that too.
Incredible also for if you're doing like time walking or you're going back to old content to farm Mog or whatever, and you end up with all this stuff and you're like, what is this from? I don't remember where I got this from or what it's for or whatever. Not having to go outside of the game to figure that out is really cool. And then, you can throw it up on the auction house or vendor it, depending on whether it's valuable or you want to use it for something. If you have some old profession you're trying to level up, maybe. I mean, at least you have the information now, right? Which before it could be kind of tough to sift through, especially if you had done a bunch of different content in one session. Your bags just fill up with this stuff, and it's like, what even is any of this? So that's a really a nice addition, and I missed that one. I didn't really see that until this post came out. This was news to me. I'm sure it's been in there, but as we've kind of detailed over the last few months here, I haven't had a lot of time for testing. I barely played beta at all, so I'm a little out of the loop with it. A lot of stuff will be new to me when it comes in tomorrow. I played alpha for a bit. But it was, stuff was still pretty rough. A lot of the UI stuff wasn't in yet. So I missed this one. And I think this is a great addition, especially because I'm feeling I might be doing some more transmog runs and stuff for the next month or so. I don't know, with the warband opening it all up so you can just fill up that collection that much faster. That that could also be a thing, and then you end up with all this stuff from wherever you went, and now you can figure out where it came from a lot easier.
Yeah, I'm thrilled with. I watched they did a Twitter post with what's happening when this goes live, and one of the big things they highlighted in that again was the transmog change for being able to just gather any transmog you come across
to learn it.
Yeah, to learn it all. So that to me is a huge feature that I'm glad's coming in. So I am excited to see that and how that actually all plays out, because man, that is a frustrating thing to get bags upon bags full of transmog and be like, if I was here on my warrior, this would have been great because I would have gotten a bunch of plate stuff. But this go around, I only got all the cloth stuff, and I'm a leather wearer, so this wasn't super helpful either. Like that feeling is not a good feeling. So I'm thrilled that they're doing that. I've also been someone who's held on to particular pieces of gear inside of my bank or inside of my void storage, because I was like, someday, if they ever do this, I will gather this appearance that I've stored away inside of my storage for all of this time. Excellent.
This is how you know somebody was playing the game in like 2011, right? Like when transmog and stuff all came in at the end of Cataclysm. I was like, oh, I had that thing, but it's not my collection because I vendored it. And those of us who went through that have certain things we've all been hoarding ever since then.
Exactly.
So now exactly we won't really have to. Yeah. It's all going to open up.
I have loot from bosses that we killed that I never could equip on a character because it was just such a cool thing. That, sure, like the two-handed sword off of Archimon back in Burning Crusade. Yeah, I have that sitting in a character's bank who can't equip it. Why? Because I was like, look, if they ever add this to this class, I want to be able to have this transmog. I want to be able to have this weapon. I'm just going to store it, and it's just going to sit there. I think it was Cataclysm's End or something like that. But that sword is still sitting there, and I'm like, look, when this thing rolls over, I now have the appearance on all of my characters who could equip this thing, even though this one character who gathered it could not. So I'm excited for these changes coming in. They're going to be really good. So yeah, that's a pumped up thing for it. Okay, let's start to touch into the spicy topic for the day. Well, I guess we'll start with the less spicy topic. We'll start with the Mythic Plus fortified tuning because this is just an easy thing to get out of the way, and we'll end with the super spicy topic that could take like 45 minutes of conversation. So I just want to be sure. In this week's beta update, we'll be reducing the damage modifier of fortified from 30% to 20%. Our goal is to reduce the overall damage to the group to offset the fact that tanks will likely need a little bit more external healing. Your feedback is greatly appreciated, and we'll keep a close eye on dungeon and raid testing, and we'll further adjust individual abilities as needed. Now, you might be like, well, why are tanks going to likely need more healing? Like, that's a weird thing to just throw into this post. Well, because the big post of the day is tuning tanks in War Within from Kyvax. All right. With the introduction of the Dragonflight talent system and season over season changes, tanks in World of Warcraft have become extremely durable relative to non-tank characters. Their active defenses can mitigate high percentages of incoming damage, and they have strong self-healing. Today, in the hardest game content, many tanks can sustain themselves without much assistance from healers. In some cases, we've seen it become optimal to do group content without a healer at all. World of Warcraft is a massively multiplayer online game, and its multiplayer aspects are a major strength. Group content is extremely rewarding when players performing different roles come together to overcome a challenge. We want to reduce the importance of the healer role. We want to reinforce the opposite of reduce. We want to reinforce the importance of the healer role and work towards gameplay where tanks and healers collaborate to reduce the damage the tank is taking and to restore the tank's lost health. Tank's durability can cause some other problems as well, especially in challenging endgame content that we want to work towards improving. Enemy damage is increased to challenge tanks. So this is like the factual part, right? They increase enemy damage to challenge tanks, but if it's increased too much, it gets spiky and puts tanks in significant danger if their defenses ever drop. Yeah, that's the thing. Hey, if their defenses are so strong, then the tanks who maintain them really well never take any substantial damage, and so we increase the damage, which means the tanks who struggle to maintain their defenses because they're not as skilled players, or they need more practice, or it's something new to them, or they're the backup guy who's just coming in to help out for the week, starts getting one shot or spiking down really low, and you're like, wow, our normal tank doesn't experience this. Well, because your normal tank is different and does this all the time and is better, maybe. This can lead to tanks getting killed rapidly, seemingly out of nowhere. We feel this is unsatisfying and would prefer tank damage to be generally be evenly distributed, but still threatening over time. If tanks are not threatening enough, then if tanks are not threatened enough, then the most challenging part of end game content can become DPS, keeping DPS and healers alive, often against high burst damage. So basically, hey, if tanks aren't really getting enough threat and aren't threatened enough, which means healers get kind of bored. So what we make challenging is we'll just make everyone else take more damage, which means that then becomes a challenge to keep DPS and healers alive because there's this like burst damage that has to go out to make this interesting. So making tank survival is a more involving element of group gameplay, could give us some freedom to ease up on the threat to the other group members. In other words, hey, making the tank play more interesting could make everyone else's gameplay more interesting, which I don't disagree with. To address the above, we're making reductions to tank durability and self-healing. This will allow us to smooth out damage tanks and parties take while retaining the challenge of keeping them alive over time. We'll take those changes into account in encounter tuning as well. My favorite part about the whole front end of this, and Jason will let you weigh in here in a second on this front end part, is their solution isn't, hey, we need to nerf healers because we need stuff to feel more dangerous. It's, no, the problem that exists here is with tanks, and tanks essentially being so survivable that we have changed how we design bosses to be the bosses just hit really, really, really hard. But then the side effect of that is that either tanks who are less experienced or even DPS or healers inside a raid group then get hit so hard for so much damage that it's not something that the nerfed healing that we would have given healers could have sustained through and helped with. So it's better to try and fix tanks in this situation. What do you feel about the front end of this conversation, Jason?
Well, this was quite a hot button discussion topic this week, as you might imagine. I saw this come through, and I was actually quite pleased. I mean, I've mentioned it on the show many a time that, I've been main spec tanking since, I don't know, 2008, something like that. Somewhere around TBC days was when it really sort of became my play style and my identity as a player, the thing I wanted to be good at. They have obviously rolled a lot of stuff back about the defensive nature of play back then. I'm not saying that I wish the game would return to the way tanking was in Burning Crusade. It was very challenging and very punishing, and I think it leaned on these sort of meta decisions around how your character was set up that had very little to do with gameplay. And, these were reasons why things got changed over the years. I think the overall model of the way tank specs work now is better. But what I really don't want to be as a tank is just a sturdier other DPS, right? Like I want to be rewarded for using my defensive abilities. I want to build my character to sustain damage and to assist my healers with making it easy to keep me alive. I don't want to worry about how much DPS I'm doing. It shouldn't be like a given that I just live through damage. So what I need to do is do as much damage as I possibly can.
Well, and how many times have we seen a boss kill a whole raid except for the tank, and the tank then live for 3 minutes on their own and finish the boss off or get the boss really low? You're like, why is that possible?
Yeah, just to sustain out, know, it's like, I'm fighting, so I have throughput. So as long as I have throughput, I'm alive because nothing's going to hit me hard enough. Yeah. It happens a lot. It has happened a lot over the years. There's definitely been situations, and you see it. Like right now, we have such high power relative to the content because you can optimize so much and get to such a high item level in Season 4. Which it's a fun stunt to pull off once in a while, but it's maybe not, it doesn't really make you feel skilled at your role because there's no, it's so hard to fail at it, I guess. I like the reward of like, oh man, look how little damage I took because I lined up these abilities for this thing that I knew was going to happen. That is, to me, that's part of what makes tanking fun and has kept it fun for me for so long. Almost 15 years. I don't know, however long I've been playing Prot Warrior is like my primary concern in this game. That's part of the reason why, because I think that the idea of, protecting the team from the dangerous enemy and, making it really easy to keep me alive and all that is always what drew me to the role. I think it's really cool. So I saw this come in, and, we've also had discussions on the show in recent years about the overall kind of rhythm of combat and how fast it's gotten and how that reduces the texture, while you're in combat. And I've sort of had these wacky ideas about, wouldn't it be cool if we could get, defensive stats back in the game on gear? We used to have like bonus armor and defense rating and expertise and stuff like that. Not that I want those specific things back, but there used to be like, okay, this cloak has bonus armor on it, so you want that because it's a really good tanking item. Or, this ring, you can put a plus armor enchantment on your ring, and that's great because then it reduces, your incoming damage so much.
Yeah.
These were concerns we used to have as tank specs, and they just don't exist anymore. I firmly believe in the sort of holy trinity of WoW combat gameplay, where you have the tank whose primary job is to round up the enemies and survive damage and protect the rest of the team. You have the DPS who, through a variety of means, are killing the enemies, and you have the healer who's keeping everybody alive and healthy. That is, WoW's combat has been so great over the years. It's always been one of the huge strengths of the game, in my opinion. Even in 2004, it felt so much better than combat in other games like it, in my opinion. And it's always the thing that keeps me coming back. And I think that, if you go too far, the example that Randy gives of like not needing a healer to do group content, at the very end of an expansion, it's sort of assumed, I guess, just because they let the power get so over the top. But that, to me, that's like game breaking. And you see Remix right now, right, is a perfect example to me of like why you want that texture. Because how many times did I say on the show, like, well, Remix, I'm just trying to, get some more bronze so I can clear out this vendor and then it'll be done, because I had fun powering up, but now it's not fun anymore because there's just no texture to the combat. Everybody's just doing as much damage as they can. Everything dies. Nothing is threatening. I think every once in a while they got to check that. And with kind of where we ended up in like late stage Dragonflight, with as much power as we've gotten, tank specs have an incredible amount of damage reduction and self-sustain and self-healing and utility that there's been two bosses, maybe not even. I can only really think of one boss in recent memory, which is Volcaros, that felt like it was doing damage to me in a raid. That was, maybe there was another one earlier this expansion, but like Volcaros was like, okay, I have to make sure I have a big button lined up for this particular thing, because wow, that really hurts. And the general default state of bosses is like, well, I'm just standing next to them, but I'm not really that concerned about how much damage they're doing to me. And I think that is a potentially warping dynamic for that traditional combat setup that we're used to and that many of us enjoy about WoW. So I am, like, philosophically, I'm on board with this. I want to play defensively. I want to be rewarded for good defensive play. I want that relationship between the different jobs inside group content to still exist and function in a way that we are accustomed to. So, from what Randy lays out about why they want to do this, I'm on board with it. I mean, the caveat is everything is tuning dependent, but I like the idea of forcing tanks to play defensively and rewarding them for doing so.
Yeah, I do also agree that tank gameplay, for some reason, at some point, a decision was made that is boring if you're not doing damage. Like that, for some reason, if you're tanking and you're always bottom of the DPS charts, that's not as much fun for tanks. So tanks need to be able to do high damage while also surviving encounters. There was no longer like a trade-off of like, hey, depending on what you're doing and how your gear is, you should swap these things out because this is really important to be sure that you're really doing as much damage as you can. It's now a minor effect. Like the majority of the time, I'd be doing mythic raids and I'd be checking tanks and they'd be wearing DPS trinkets and they'd be wearing a DPS flask and they'd be wearing like all the stuff to do as much damage as possible because they just had enough sustain. Sure, if they can get through the fight with just the buttons they have on their bar and item level they have on their gear without having to really, tune in certain gear items to make sure that they could have the self-sustain that they need to be able to make it through a fight, they could just throw on as much damage as possible. So they just find that break point of like, where's the point where I live through this fight comfortably without like really risky things happening, while also being able to just pump out as much damage as possible. And then you start seeing tanks crawl up the damage meters and get higher and higher and higher. And you're like, well, that shouldn't be a thing. That's not what their role is, right? Like, it's very strange that then became the gameplay of like a tank should be one of the like big damage dealers inside of the raid, while also being a sustained keep everyone alive by tanking the big bad thing role. So I'm looking forward to this shift, because I feel like this putting tanks back inside the tank box is actually could be a really healthy thing for the game. And you know, as much as people kind of really enjoy getting out there and just pumping out as much damage as possible as a tank, I don't think that's your role. And I think you should be playing a DPS if that's what you want to do. If what you want to do is get up in something's face and do as much damage to it as possible, go play a melee DPS. There are tons of them in the game as far as classes and that you can play. So be sure that you're taking advantage of that. All right, I'm going to continue with this post. Tanks will take more damage overall, but shouldn't die significantly more often. To increase the overall damage tanks take and their reliance on healers, we've primarily increased the percentage of damage they take after mitigation from steady damage sources like physical attacks. We're making fewer reductions to each class's defenses against burst damage or threats that are currently most likely to be lethal to them. Encounters will be tuned with this in mind. So the character of tank damage changes, but the lethality of it doesn't significantly increase. So in other words, hey, you're going to take heavier, white hit melee attacks, those like common hit melee attacks that happen, but they're not going to make the giant spiky, we're going to do 60% of your health thing suddenly do 80%. Those abilities aren't going to get tuned differently. So they're making everything kind of hit a little bit harder, but they're not going to make it so that the big burst damage spells are things that are going to wipe you out. All right, tank damage intake should be steady and not too fast. One of our goals for these changes is to smooth out the rate tanks take damage to reduce surprise spiky deaths. Healers should have time to respond to tank health, and tanks should have time to use self-heals like Word of Glory or Celestial Brew. For some classes, we're increasing their passive defenses to compensate for decreases to more active or reactive defensive mechanics. Tank busters will still create challenging moments that reward tanks for planning and use of smart cooldowns. Like, they still want the strategy to be there behind tanking. They don't want to be a situation where, all the damage is just steady and regular, so it really is just the healer's job to keep me alive, because it doesn't really matter what buttons I'm really pushing. I can just stand here and take hits, and as long as I get a big heal once every 2 seconds, I'm good, right? Like, that shouldn't be the situation you're in. You should still be looking at fights and going, hey, well, that big ability's coming up in 3 minutes because they just did it, and I just used my big cooldown for it, so I'm going to hold on to that ability when it comes off cooldown in 2 minutes for that next 3-minute wave of damage that's going to happen, and make sure I have that big cooldown ready for that. There's still going to be those tank buster, as they put it, abilities in the game that are going to require tanks to plan out how they do a fight strategically, which is important. Jason, why don't you comment on these two things real quicker?
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the big things I think too, and we'll see this. I want to talk a little bit, once we get through the meat of the discussion here of what they posted about the proposed, Prot Warrior changes, the ones that I guess are live on the beta, but like, because one of the things that you're doing is sort of reducing some of your cooldown reduction options on your big buttons. And, I think that ties into the philosophical point about steady damage intake that's not too fast, and about using your cooldown smartly, have challenged tanks to use their cooldown smartly. And it's like where we're at and where we've been at for a long time, really. I mean, I think the power ramp in Dragonflight was pretty fast, and we certainly came out of Shadowlands just with an absurd amount of power in season 3, season 4. And then season 1, you have that sort of ramp up where it's like, okay, we have to grow from somewhere. So we're coming back down to a more reasonable baseline. But I think it went up pretty fast where it's like, I have access to Shield Wall basically more than I would ever even want to use it, because of things like the CDR talents. When you combine that with the amount of throughput you can generate at high haste, it's just a button that's pretty like on a raid boss. It's just sort of like always there for you, because if you're the active tank, then you have it ready to go. And if you're not actively tanking, then you're standing there waiting for your turn, beating on the thing, and just throughput is reducing your cooldowns on your big buttons, so you have it for next time. So, I think some of those things kind of go hand in hand. And I mean, again, for me, the whole thing here, there's a lot of tuning changes coming, right? We did see some healer nerfs come in a couple weeks ago. We're seeing a lot of changes to health pools, right? Health pool changes came in last week or the week before. They're tuning mob damage and everything like that. There's not one knob that gets turned and then they're done, right? This is kind of all part of a broader overview of how combat feels and where they can go with it and what space they have to design combat, really. So I think, like overall, again, like I'm a very defensively minded tank. Like it is fun when you like have mastery over content, or you've sort of power curved out of the content you're doing and you can add damage in there. But it's not my primary concern. And so being in a position where like DPS trinkets are just the default thing that I want every season, and I'm rolling against DPS for them, because why do I need another tank button when I have more than I could ever want to begin with? That all feels weird to me too. Like that's an element that I haven't really loved about the direction of the role in the game overall. But yeah, I mean, I think I think the key point is the lethality, right? Because you don't want those rubber banding health bars. That's no fun for anybody, and it's very hard to design any kind of texture into combat like that. But tanks should have to pay attention to how much damage they're taking. Healers should have to pay attention to how much damage the tank is taking. You should have a healer to heal your tank. Those are all things that I believe in as like core elements of WoW combat, to be honest. So, and that may be controversial to some, but this is again, like 15, 16 years maining this one spec. I feel kind of strongly about this stuff, right? It is really what I like about the game. Yeah. So now I think there's also a fair criticism that I will accept of what I'm saying is that I'm a lifetime Prot Warrior main, and Prot Warriors already have all of these concerns, right? Like this is the way you play Prot Warrior, and you are lower damage than a lot of other specs. You have way less self-healing than other specs do. Like your whole job is that kind of smooth damage intake, and you're good at that and not that much else when it comes into the big picture of how much damage do you have, and what, I don't stuff like that. How much are you providing that? How much pressure are you taking off of your healers, because you're just healing all of the damage that you take back and all that. So, like a Blood DK probably feels a bit differently about these changes than I do. Yeah. Although some people I talk to who main Blood DK don't seem particularly bothered about it either. I think it's just a mindset thing, right? Like for the really high-end players who want to super optimize, it's like, well, you need tanks to do as much damage as possible, because otherwise you don't have enough overall group damage to down a boss that's a really tight check. Yeah. And that, I think that there's validity to that, but that's a design problem. It is. That means the boss is not tuned properly. If you need a significant... Or you're trying to do that content before you have the gear to do that content, which has been a consistently interesting thing that we see with Race to World First and that sort of stuff, of how quickly can we clear this raid, really coming down to the point of, well, how much item level can we gain from outside sources, outside of Mythic Raid sources is what I'm going for, to be able to make sure that as quickly as possible, we can have people as geared as possible to make the content achievable for us. Because there are certainly bosses out there and raids out there that have been tuned, even Dragonflight, where if you just showed up in greens and so a couple of blues, you wouldn't be able to do Mythic Raid content. People wouldn't be able to clear it. You just don't meet the item level requirements to be able to do the damage needed to be able to actually kill that boss. So yeah, inside that high-end Mythic raiding perspective, you need every ounce of damage. If your healers aren't healing, they are dealing damage and throwing damage on a boss. Why? Because when a DPS accidentally walks off of a platform and dies, you need to make up for that damage that you're now lacking. You also need to make up for a healer who necessarily is going to run out of mana sooner because the boss goes on too long, or a tank who only has so many cooldowns, or a boss who has a soft enrage. Like all those things you want to try and beat by having a situation where your tanks are doing as much damage as possible, your healers doing as much damage as possible. Now, I think it's neat that healers and tanks can do damage. I do not think healers and tanks should do competitive damage.
I really don't. And I think it should be a substantial loss of your primary role to do that secondary damage. I think if you are choosing to use globals and to use mana as a resource as a healer, or whatever, chi or whatever resource you're using to do damage, you're doing that at the cost of 3 times as much healing that you could be doing in that window. So the only times it's really strong to do those other things, in my opinion, should be when there's nothing that's requiring you to manage your role. Tanks should be giving up a substantial amount of, self-survivability to do damage during an encounter. When would they do that? When they're off tanking. When it's not their opportunity to do tanking things is when they can then do damage things. And in choosing to do damage things, that should be a choice that exposes them more, because they're not holding up their shield or, all bark skinned up or whatever it is to be able to absorb those hits. They should be exposing themselves to more damage intake by choosing to use those globals and those things to do damage. So I do feel like that's what we should see from these archetypes. And so I'm glad to see we're shifting a little bit in that direction, even though I'd like to see things like damage from healers and tanks brought down even farther, to put that role of the DPS into a more important space than it currently is. I do think it's weird to see competitive damage tanks inside of a raid. That's a very strange thing to me.
Yeah, I mean, like, it's fun to be able to contribute damage and stuff, like, for sure. I'm not saying that it's not, even for me, that it is fun to do that, but it's become much more of a primary concern. It's much more top of mind for me when I'm like gearing my character out or like speccing it out than it has been in the past. I do think part of this is an effect of having the talent trees that we have, having the class and spec trees and having all these choices to make. Not that it's a bad thing, but I think it's sort of a natural knock-on effect of having that stuff, because you're not going to have a full suite of defensive talents in the warrior tree, right? Like, you're going to have some, and you're going to have some things that add group utility or whatever, right? But the really specific tanking stuff is mostly going to be in the prot tree. And so then you're going to have a lot of damage abilities that you end up speccing into just as a matter of course to build out your class tree. So I think with that in mind, like, and it's cool to have more options to use in combat and to be able to contribute damage when off tanking or in a situation that isn't dangerous, or even just out in the world, right? Just in a prot build out in the world, killing stuff to do quests. All that stuff is awesome, but I think that sort of creates the climate where they felt compelled to make these changes, because you have so many more options about how you can set your character up and how much damage you can squeeze into a tank spec. I think that's all part of it too. You want the players to have choices and have fun and to feel like their character can do a lot of stuff. I'm not saying like I don't want to be able to use execute and sudden death in tank spec or something.
No,
that feels really cool.
You should. I absolutely think you should.
Yeah, like that's really cool, but it has the impact. Like if you don't check this stuff occasionally and say, okay, like what is the overall pace of combat and what is the overall texture of combat? If you don't check it, then it just becomes this arms race that never stops. So I'm not saying I want my abilities like rolled back or something, and like I can definitely understand players who tank because nobody else wants to do it, and so then the fun for them is finding all that damage. But for me, it's like I want to see the game take a step more in this direction. Let's emphasize that tanks play defensively. Tanks defend themselves. That is their key role. Yeah. Tanks make it easy for their group to do their jobs. Like, that's a very important part of a good tank. So yeah, it's this is all stuff that I think with 2 years of Dragonflight and having these more diverse builds and among tank classes and everything, that I think kind of brings these problems more to the forefront. It's like, oh yeah, okay, let's dial this back here. We don't want to take away the play style necessarily, but we have to kind of rearrange where the power is. Yeah,
and I don't want to act like I'm basically telling people, hey, I want questing to be really hard for healers and tanks. That basically you have to go into a DPS spec to go questing in the world, because that's not fun or enjoyable content at all. But a really crude way, a way that obviously has not been refined at all, to sort of emphasize what I'm trying to say, would be if a tank is essentially doing damage, if that's their main goal, they're pressing really high-end damage abilities that have nothing to do with survivability, it would almost be like, okay, while you're pressing these abilities, there's a 1 second debuff you get that's just called exposed, and you just take 20% increased damage while you're pressing these buttons, because You're essentially opening yourself up to take damage by doing what you're doing. There isn't a defensive way to use some of these abilities that you're choosing to use. So you're going to take increased damage while you're using them. And that just shifts them into a DPS role. And their damage could still be on par hitting wise, as far as how hard you hit while you're exposed with a DPS. The difference is you only do that when you're off tanking, which means you only do it 50% of the time compared to a DPS who's doing 100% of the time. That sort of idea, and like I said, it's a crude example, but that's what I would consider a way to sort of achieve that. Similarly with healers, when they make damage spells more expensive, right? You're like, okay, well, you're choosing to use your mana, your finite resource that you use for healing, to do damage. So your damage spells, sure, they pump out damage. They do as much damage as DPS does for sure. And you can have a really good rotation for, 5 or 6 rotations, but then you're out of mana. And now you're in a situation where you can't heal people. So it's really that balance of like, where can you choose to use this? Only weave in these spells when you're above 80% mana or something like that. And that's what you're choosing to do as a healer, is only maintaining that damage inside of that window of time that makes sense for you to be doing that for that role, right? Because you still need to have your main role be your main thing that you're taking care of. And the cost of doing that, it would mean the execute phase would be really interesting, right? Of, okay, do we just throw a bunch of cooldowns onto a tank and then all of our healers dump all of the remaining mana that they have into damage to try and burst that extra 2% or 1% to kill a boss inside that last little period? Would be an interesting thing to see, right? But the role of the healer and the role of the tank, I agree, need to get back into their boxes to be able to make this triad that we love so much really feel effective. And I think they've drifted so far out of that you have healers trying to find every possible global and window of time to weave in as much damage as possible, and you have tanks trying to gear as close to the line as they can with DPS gear to try and push as much damage as they can. And I don't think that's a healthy thing for the game, in my opinion. So I'd like to see it change.
Well, the other thing too is I think that, there's still going to be players that do that, right? The players at the absolute top end are still going to play that way. And
sure.
And the burden's just going to be higher, right? It's going to be harder to do it. They're still going to do as much of it as they can, and maybe the yield is also lower, so it's like higher risk, lower reward, but that you still come out positive if you can live, right? And so the super high-end teams that want to do that, they're going to do it. But I don't think that should necessarily inform the way the vast majority of the player base actually interacts with the game. Like, I that's just my personal feeling on it. And I think, some of the specific changes they've laid out so far, it's not like we're talking about, well, your tanks are going to take 40% more damage than they're taking right now or something, right? Like they're tweaking stuff. They're not making like, again, they don't want your tanks to be getting like one hit or your health to be yo-yoing between empty and full. That's not what they're shooting for. And they even say in the post that like, there's probably going to be some iteration necessary to dial it into where it actually feels the way they want to. And I think that's fair. I see a lot of consternation among players about how like they're doing this so close to release and everything like that, which is understandable because it's scary, right? We're changing a lot of the way combat is tuned and a lot about the way one of our primary endgame, activities in Mythic Plus is tuned.
Yeah.
And so that's concerning because we're going to be playing expansion in a month. And so why are you doing this now? But like, this is the cycle. For better or for worse, this is the cycle. This is what they do. Well, this is the only way they can tune it is at the very end. Yeah. And then tuning is the ongoing struggle week to week, month to month. What are players' experiences? What does our data say? What needs to change? And what can we change? So I get the sort of trepidation of like, oh, this is too close to release. Like this is, I can't believe they're doing this, but like, this is the way that this is the production schedule of the game for quite a long time. I will say I have faith that they'll get it right, even if it doesn't, if it isn't right at first, right? Like I believe that they'll get there.
I struggle with that argument because to me, this is the best possible time to do any change like this. This is when everyone needs to regear. Everyone's class basically gets a reset because of all the changes to talents and hero talents and things that are happening. All of the tuning and balancing is happening. Like, this is when people change classes, change roles, change a lot of things about their character. This is that window of time to me where it's like, yeah, if you're going to mix up that triad to make things, a little different into how damage is received by tanks and how damage outputs happens with tanks and what's going on with tanks, this is the window of time to do it, because everyone's going to be level up a tank and start doing normal dungeons and start doing delves and start doing heroic dungeons and start doing mythic zeros. And as they start to sort of work their way through doing all that content, you're going to get a really clear picture of how well and effective this is before raid content comes out. Because you got almost 3 weeks before raid content comes out after these changes have taken effect and people are, starting to play into the content. So, if this stuff kicks off tomorrow, right, that would be even more time to explore that sort of thing and check out that content. You'd have 7 weeks or 8 weeks before you actually hit the new raid content to see how this feels and balance around it and tune around it and get things right. And they're not going to be able to do that with a PTR. You just don't have enough people playing and enough different scenarios happening to be able to get a really clear picture as to what's going on. When this content goes live, you have millions of groups that are experiencing this on a huge scale of skill, between, the brand new tank who's never done it before, all the way up to the top end mythic raider who can do this while, watching football on television and be a master at it. Like that is the skill level scale that you sort of have. And you get a really clear picture of, okay, where is this effective? What else do we need to change? What sort of things do we need to tweak? And all of that happens before we walk into season 1, which is going to be great. I think that's exactly what we need. So to me, this is like the window to do this in, that's going to have the least impact on people's achievable things that they want to achieve inside of the game that are limited time, right? Like we're seeing the end of the Mythic Plus race that's going on, with that closing out for titles, PvP stuff closing out for titles, all that stuff's closing out for titles. This is the window to do that before someone's like, oh my God, I'm not going to get the thing I want to get, or they're 2 weeks into progression. Oh my God, they've changed tanks dramatically during progression. Like they're just not going to get another chance for like 8 months, 10 months to do anything like this. So I think it's a good window to do it. I'm happy to see it.
Yeah, it has to be a beginning of expansion thing, right?
Yeah.
It's just for the reasons that you stated, it has to be. There's no way they could do this like midstream once an expansion was off and running. But yeah, like it's also tough to do it any earlier, because like you need to dial the tuning in for level 80, not level 70 at this point. And I get that it's scary when all this stuff is changing so much this close to an expansion release, but I feel like these are conversations we have every 2 years. And I'm not saying like this is going to be perfect and the day the expansion comes out, there's going to be no problems. Like we know that it's going to be a bumpy ride the first few weeks. The question is not how close to perfect is it going to launch. That's to me, that's never the right question to think about. It's more, how long is it going to take for it to start feeling good, right?
Yeah.
And that's the real challenge, I think. And yeah, I mean, they're going to have a whole extra weekend of people doing like heroic dungeons and stuff. That should give them at least some idea of, okay, are there any real points of concern, any real outliers here that we need to address right away?
Yeah.
Which is, it's tough. They have to sort of build the tracks in front of the train when it comes to balancing this stuff. But
for sure.
I mean, look how much they rebalanced throughout the course of Dragonflight. I have no doubt that they're gonna keep an eye on it. They're gonna keep stuff dialed in as best they can, and they're gonna make adjustments where there needs to be. And if they don't, I mean, they have been much more receptive to feedback, I feel like, in the last few years than they had traditionally been. So if we are unhappy enough to make enough of a stink, then I think it's also reasonable to assume that stuff is going to change as a result of that.
Yep.
I mean, it's tricky because like we can't have. I don't want players designing the game. I think that leads to some other weird problems. Like I want them to design a game that they think is cool, but I also want them to respond to where we have the most fun with it, right?
Yeah.
Like if we say that a thing isn't fun, then I want them to believe that and flex on it, right?
Agreed.
And I think we've seen them do that. So I don't know. I know that like this. I think the overall reaction to these changes has been probably less negative than I thought it would be when I initially read it. But I don't really know how many people feel the same way I do about the tank gameplay and the defense first sort of mindset. I think there are players who that does appeal to. So I think even if it's a situation where, okay, we dial the cadence and the overall like rhythm of combat like way down at the start of this expansion, and by the time everybody's powered up and we're in season 3 and we have all the best gear that we're going to get and the best 2 set bonuses and best trinkets, that everybody's just a superhero again. Well, like, okay, that's fair, I guess. But the point is the journey to get there. Was the journey to get there fun? And if so, then I think it's worthwhile, to be honest. If we came out of the gate and like your tank is just alive forever, killing heroic bosses while the whole rest of the party's dead because you're trying to learn how a mechanic works. Like, I don't think it's a great starting point for an expansion. I think you need to have room to grow and room for players to feel like they're acquiring power as they go up the ladder.
Yeah, I do feel like you need to make it clear to players that they have what their role is and what their objective is when they're playing a particular class and playing a particular role. So I do hope that they do make that clear for everyone, that tank's objective here is to be survival and not to do damage. And that might mean gearing differently. That might mean having different priorities as far as what loot you're looking for. It might mean, hey, guess what? Tanks are no longer running sims as often to see whether or not they can crank their damage up a bit higher by switching out this one trinket or this one ring when it comes to sacrificing survivability. But I want to highlight a few more things in this post before we move on from it, which is that tanks will have strong answers to threats or periods of danger, but less sustained self-healing. So tanks should have anatomy over their own survival, and will still have cooldowns and emergency self-heals like renewal or impending victory. But the healing of continuous effects like Elun's Favored or Indomitable are reduced. So tanks must have more of a partnership with healers to restore their missing health once it's lost. Healer gameplay should not be dominated by tank healing. Healers play a critical role, and keeping tanks alive is part of what they bring to the table. However, healers contribute to the success of groups in many ways, especially in dungeons. They sustain the group, dispel harmful effects, and respond to burst damage, all while doing mechanics. Tank healing should not demand so much that it interferes with their other roles. It may take some iteration to get the balance right on this, where healers feel essential to the tank survival, but with their attention not overly demanded by it. So I'm glad they're considering healers. I'm going to read the last part of this real quick here first, though. Tank gameplay should not significantly change or require actions like kiting to survive. We're happy that more players are enjoying tanks with their friends and in pickup groups. There are a lot of demands on tanks, such as learning Mythic Plus routes, leading groups, and knowing what trash abilities are particularly dangerous. The gameplay of standing toe-to-toe with groups of enemies and the tactics you've learned to survive should continue to be effective. So overall, a great post. And there's definitely more feedback they asked for on it. I'm glad he highlighted the particular, I guess, role of a healer and all the different things healers have to pay attention to when it comes to sustaining the group, sustaining a tank, dispelling effects, responding to burst damage, and which is people stepping in things they shouldn't is another thing that happens, as well as doing mechanics themselves and avoiding mechanics themselves. And so they don't want to put this extra sort of onus on healers to go, hey, guess what? We made tanking more dangerous. So now you have, keeping tanks alive is every healer's role. Whereas what it used to be way back in the day is you have one or two healers assigned to a tank to just keep that tank alive. And that's all they did on top of mechanics and maybe some dispelling here and there. Whereas other healers would be assigned to different groups in the raid or different, the raid in general, that sort of role. And they'd have different roles that way. And I feel like they're moving more towards going, hey, it's good to have a healer or two who keeps an eye on a tank, but in general, they should still be focused on their regular role as to what's happening, even if tanks are, now having less sustained healing on themselves. And what that comes down to for me is a great example you gave was blood decays, where there'd be times where I'd be doing a group with blood decay where I would hardly ever heal the tank. I would just be healing everyone else for doing damage. That's all I was doing inside that role, because blood decays just had so much sustain. The moment they drop below 60% health, they just snap back to 100%. And just keep doing it over and over again. And you're like, all right, like I just don't need to heal you. And at the end of the run, the tank has done twice as much healing as the healer has. And you're like, well, but why is that a thing? Well, that's a thing because that's the way tanks were developed and where tanks had sort of gone as far as their own self-sustaining goes. And blood decays just do a lot of healing. And it is one of those situations where you're like, okay, I'm glad they're looking at this and tuning this because it needs to be addressed. And I don't want to be this out of control. So as far as feedback goes, they said the questions they want people to answer and to look at are: how durable do you feel before and after the changes? What makes you feel that difference? In what ways do you change how you play? how did it change your builds? In what scenarios are you getting into trouble? For healers, how much more of your attention went to tanks compared to before? And we'd also love to share content you played on this level. So like, did you do Mythic Plus keys, Delves, Heroic or Mythic rating, etc.? What difficulty level you and your friends normally clear, and what your experience level is for your class. So this is all information they're looking for in the feedback thread that's attached to this, obviously linked in the post below on the actual startingzone.com website. But they want all that feedback and that information. And I know Jason's going to dig into Prot Warriors and what actually changed for Prot Warriors as far as their tuning goes and what that might mean for him. But overall, I think it's great to see them having a look at this particular issue and trying to address it. I think they've done a good job with this post, and I look forward to seeing what it's going to feel like and what the growing pains on it are going to be like. Yeah, I mean, a couple of things about these last few items. I like the philosophy that healer gameplay should not be dominated by tank healing. That feels correct to me. Like, you want your healer to be keeping an eye on you. Like, I don't want my healer to let me die, but I also don't want to feel like the healer's job is to stand there and just pump heals into me so that I can stay alive. This could present an issue early on, especially while tuning is in flux. If you have like a really sort of below median skill tank, this could create kind of a big problem, because that may demand a lot more attention from the healer than is intended, right? So this may punish lower skill tanks and groups with lower skill tanks than, anybody else, right? I think that's the point that I see, is it maybe in like a less experienced, newer tank, somebody who's trying it out because they want to tank for their group or whatever, and then they're just getting lit up because they're not using their buttons properly, and then it's a much bigger burden on the whole team. Like that could be a real concern and a growing pain here as they try to like dial this stuff in. I like that they mentioned the idea is not for tanks to be kiting. Like if you design a fight or certain kinds of mobs that like the tank should be kiting, that's one thing, versus where we've seen in the past, like in Shadowlands, there were certain metas where the correct thing to do in order to do like a keystone was for the tank to get in there, dump as much AoE as possible, build up as much threat, and then just run around until the mobs were dead. Like that's anti-gameplay. If we end up in that spot, then the mobs are just tuned too high. It's not that, tanks need more damage reduction. It's the enemies are hitting the tank way too hard. Now, granted, if you're trying to do some kind of, pocket strat thing, like an MDI style pull or whatever, then there might be room for that, because you're trying to essentially break the game, right? You're not doing what the game is asking you to do. You're trying to go above and beyond that. So that's a different category than the average group goes into a +8 and the tank spends most of their time just running in circles because they can't afford to get meleeed. Like nobody wants to live in that world. The other thing is, I think it was really smart the way that in this post that they ask for feedback, because a lot of times in these posts, Randy or Linksy will say, thank you for all your feedback on this topic. We've decided to do this, or like, hey, we made these changes. Let us know. Your feedback is appreciated, whatever. What they almost never do is something like this, where they're asking for really directed feedback. These are the things we want to know about. We want to know how it felt. Like, how did it feel to do this? Like, what were you doing and what did you feel like when you were doing it? I think that's really good, because this is stuff they can act upon, right? You put up a post like this and the feedback section says, hey, send us your feedback. Let us know how you feel about these changes. And then you get a bunch of people just flaming you in the comment thread. Like, oh, okay. But sort of directing like, okay, this is what we want to know. This is what we're thinking about. And so like, we want to know what your experience was. That's got to lead to more useful and productive feedback for them to really dial this in. I got to feel like. So yeah, overall, I think it was a really good post. I know it's maybe not what every player who has ever played a tank spec wants to hear. I think for some of us, it really serves our sort of goals with the game, our play styles, our character fantasies that we want to, play out in the game. And, I don't know, I sound like a broken record, I feel like, when it comes to them doing these tuning changes in the game, whether it's the Mythic Plus stuff, the healer changes, now the tank changes. Like, it all depends on what it's tuned to feel like. And it's hard for me to really assess beyond that. Like, I can't look at this in a vacuum and go, oh, this feels good or bad to play, right? Because you have all these other moving pieces, and none of which I can look at and go, this is like the Mythic Plus affix changes.
I think I mentioned on the show last week, like I don't see where we're going. I'm starting to not see how this is better than what we already had. But again, like I haven't played it. I don't know how it feels. And that's the ultimate, that's the only indicator that really matters. Like, what does it feel like to play? And so that's where we got to get to.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Thank you all for joining us for this conversation about tanking and all the tank changes that are happening. I'd like to take a moment to thank our patrons. They contribute a ton to our show and help us improve on the content we create. Today, I want to give a big shout out to Arajian, Celian, Elianas, James, Kapawi, Max, Pinky, Shorel, and Rager. Thank you so much for all you all give to the show and support the show, and all of our patrons going all the way back to those who still support us, those who support us in the past. Thank you. You help keep the show going, keep it on the rails, keep the content coming out every week and paying all the bills and for the show. And big thanks to our newest patron, Joe Yu. Joe, thank you so much for hopping in and support the show as well. If you want to hop in and support the show, you can go to thestartingzone.com. We have a Patreon link there, or you can go to patreon.com/thestartingzone and hop on to that and support the show. Appreciate all you patrons. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, patrons, past and present. And I mean, geez, next month is going to be what? 8 years of us doing the show on
Something
a weekly
like that.
basis,
Yeah.
And that means 7 years of the Patreon being up. So that's a long time, especially for a show that's only about one game basically ever, right? We almost never talk about anything else that isn't some version of World of Warcraft. So it's just been incredible, and we really couldn't do without you. So thank you all for supporting what we do around here, and welcome aboard, Joe. Glad to have you.
Yeah, another great way to support the show is leaving us those 5-star reviews. There are now 5-star ratings you can leave on Spotify for those who are curious, and you listen on Spotify, toss us a 5-star. But another way to do it is by going to your iTunes, your Apple Podcasts, and leaving us a 5-star review there. Those ones really lift us up the charts and help more people find the show. So if you want to go to Spotify or you want to go over to iTunes, you can leave us 5 stars there, but you can also leave reviews, which we love to read on the show over on iTunes. And this one comes in from Trippy Tree out of Australia, entitled A Real Achievement. Apparently a WoW player since 2005 from UK to a move to Australia. I burned out after Shadowlands and I've only just returned. I feel you on that. In such a vast landscape and with so many types of gameplay, this podcast is a real achievement, and you guys should be very proud of what you deliver. Informative, balanced, and very clear. It is obvious you both love what you do, and it shows. I am not sure I would have found my way back into Dragonflight without your help on showing what is going on in the game and what particularly is relevant to do each week. Great stuff, guys. Keep it up. I will keep listening. Trippy Tree, the Resto Druid out of Australia. Thank you so much for leaving us that review. It doesn't matter where you are in the world. They all help the show. And I love hearing these things. So you've been playing WoW almost as long as I've been playing WoW. And we both did the Shadowlands burnout thing and took a break. I got back into Dragonflight and had a look. And yeah, it's great that you're leaving us the 5-star. It helps us out a lot. And thank you so much. And I'm glad you're enjoying the game. And I think so many people are going to be coming back for War Within. I think it's going to be a really great chunk of content for folks to dive into. And it's going to be a lot of fun. So I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, I agree. I think so. And yeah, thank you, Trippy, for writing in and letting us know. It's really great to hear from you, and glad we could help. That is one of our missions here. Is we want people to feel like they have something, for them still in this game. And if you've been out for a while and you come back, it can be really hard to navigate. And what does this mean? And what is important to do or whatever. So being able to provide that for people is real. It's nice to hear, because that's what we want to do. We want people to enjoy the game with us because we really like playing it, and it is an MMORPG. So the more people playing it, the better. And yeah, I think in a lot of ways, Dragonflight was a proven expansion for some people. There was fundamental problems with Shadowlands, and it definitely turned a lot of people off. It did get better, but it got so bad that it didn't. There was no way they could mitigate all of that damage.
There needed to be recovery. The biggest issue with Shadowlands was that they did so much damage and it was so hard that people just needed a break to recover before they could come back and embrace the game again.
Yeah, pretty much. Like, even though the second year of Shadowlands was a big improvement, it's like the damage is already well done, And I think, we'll see where we end up. But I do think War Within is in a great position to capitalize on the smart decisions they made around Dragonflight, which there were a lot. I mean, I think it's been a great expansion. And the question is, can they avoid those kind of pitfalls? We haven't had two really strong expansions back to back in a long time. I would argue going back
Burning
to
Crusade
PvC
and
into Wrath.
Yep.
Yeah, I think that's the last time we had two that were really strong back to back. I mean, Legion BFA, I think we could make a case for around here for sure, but. BFA obviously was not something a lot of players responded to very well. So
the first 6 months of BFA were terrible, and then it started to get better. But yes, yeah.
Yeah, so I think if they can avoid some of those pitfalls, then this could be sort of an unprecedented era of modern WoW, where it's like I don't know, I don't see a lot of people who've stuck with Dragonflight being really down on it. I think people who have been invested in it have really enjoyed it for the most part. And like I said at the top of the show, we've seen a lot more investment and attendance, just overall interest in what we're doing as a group than we typically would this far in, which I think says something about the quality of this expansion. And I think they're in a great position to capitalize on it with War Within. And I do think there'll be a lot of people. I'm expecting to see a lot of people start popping in, tomorrow. Just the Warbands thing alone is going to get a lot of people's eyeballs, because even if you've been out for a long time and then you hear like, oh, all of my characters so just like share all this stuff, and there's like a shared bank, and I get all this stuff by, just having the character exist on the account. That might just get some eyeballs back on it that have been away for a really long time, because it's such a massive change to the way that we think about it.
It really is. All right, that's going to wrap up episode 641 of The Starting Zone. If you want to check out show notes for this episode or leave us a comment on the show, you can head on over to thestartingzone.com, the official website for the Starting Zone podcast. If you want to contact the show and leave us your feedback, you can reach out to us via Gmail at thestartingzone@gmail.com, or tweet us on Twitter at thestartingzone, or on Discord. You can join our Discord server at thestartingzone.com/discord. And we'll see you in there chatting away inside the Discord chat. If you want to get your hands on some TSE gear, you can find it over at TeePublic. That's teepublic.com/stores/the Starting Zone. And Jason, where can folks find you on the internet?
Best place to find me, as always, is over on Twitter. You can find me over there at Shieldwald. You can also find me over on Blue Sky. It's just Jay Lucas over there. And you can also find the video channels over at twitch.tv/Shieldwald and youtube.com/Shieldwald. They've been quiet. I haven't been streaming very much at all, just like once, I think, in the last month. But yeah, I'll be a bit more active over there now that we got War Within stuff starting to spin up. So check out the channels over there and come hang out.
Yeah, if you're trying to find me, you can find me on Twitter at Spencer_Downey, over on Twitch at twitch.tv/SpencerHD, or on YouTube at youtube.com/@SpencerHD. And with that, you can also check out the Starting Zone at startingzone.com. At the youtube.com/thestartingzone. That's where that show can be found as well. If you're someone who likes a video product, or if you want an audio product on YouTube, or if you want, it's everywhere. You can find the show everywhere. You've clearly found it today. With that, for Jason and myself, we want to say thanks for listening, and job's done.